deep in the misty forests of Vermont, where cell phone signals fade and nature rules supreme. A simple act of kindness is about to change two lives forever. Mark Thompson, a hard-working single father struggling to make ends meet, is hiking with his young daughter when distant cries pierce the morning calm. Following his instincts, he discovers a woman trapped in quicksand, her expensive clothes caked in mud, desperation in her eyes. Without hesitation, he risks his own safety to save her, never knowing she's Sarah Maxwell, the reclusive billionaire heiress seeking escape from her high-profile life. What happens when fate brings together two souls from vastly different worlds through one selfless act of courage? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mark Thompson's calloused hands moved methodically across the old kitchen table, sanding down the rough edges where Emma had gotten a splinter last week. The morning sun filtered through threadbare curtains, casting long shadows across the cabin's worn floorboards. Behind him, a kettle whistled on the ancient stovetop, a sound that always made him pause and glance at the faded photograph on the wall. Sarah had loved that sound. "It means home," she'd say, her smile bright even in those final days at the hospital. Now, 5 years later, that same smile beamed from their 8-year-old daughter's face as she bounded down the stairs, her backpack already secured for their weekly hiking adventure. "Dad, did you pack the trail mix?" Emma's voice carried the same musical lilt as her mother's, a reminder that brought both joy and an familiar ache to Mark's chest. "Right here, sunshine." He patted the worn canvas bag by his feet. "And your nature journal's in there too." The journal had been last year's Christmas gift, bought with extra money he'd earned doing repairs at the local diner. Its pages were now filled with Emma's careful drawings of leaves, birds, and woodland creatures, each one labelled in her improving handwriting. Mark checked his watch, an old Timex that had seen better days, just like everything else in their modest home. He had exactly 45 minutes before he needed to start his workday. These Friday morning hikes with Emma were sacred, carved out of his packed schedule of handyman jobs and odd repairs that barely kept them afloat. "Remember the rules?" he asked, shouldering their shared backpack. Emma rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Reciting from memory, stay where you can see me, no picking strange plants, and always answer when you call." She grabbed her walking stick from beside the door, a piece of maple he'd smoothed and decorated with her on her 8th birthday. "And watch out for quicksand," she added with theatrical flair. Mark chuckled. "There's no quicksand in Vermont. Kiddo, you've been watching too many adventure movies." The morning air was crisp as they stepped onto their small porch, the wooden steps creaking beneath their feet. Their cabin sat at the edge of the state forest, a location that made up in natural beauty what it lacked in modern conveniences. The mortgage was manageable, barely, thanks to its remote location and modest size. Emma skipped ahead, her dark braids bouncing against her purple jacket, a hand-me-down from their neighbor's daughter that she insisted was vintage cool. Mark watched her navigate the familiar path with confident steps, pride mixing with worry in his chest. She was growing up too fast, asking questions that became harder to answer. Why couldn't they go to Disney World like her classmates? Why did they have to buy everything from thrift stores? When would they get a new car to replace their rusting pickup? He'd learned to be honest with her, explaining their situation in terms she could understand. "We're rich in different ways," he'd tell her, pointing out the sunset views from their porch, the symphony of birdsong in their backyard, the freedom to walk in nature whenever they wanted. Most days, it felt like enough. But sometimes, watching her press her nose against shop windows or carefully fold the pages of toy catalogues, his heart would clench with a familiar guilt. The trail opened up before them, damp with morning dew and scattered with early autumn leaves. Emma had already pulled out her journal, ready to document any new discoveries. Mark adjusted the backpack straps, feeling the comfortable weight of their morning provisions: trail mix, water bottles, a basic first aid kit, and Emma's precious journal. Everything they needed for their weekly adventure. "Dad!" Emma called. From a few steps ahead, her voice carrying that tone of serious inquiry he'd come to recognize. "Do you think Mom would have liked our Friday hikes?" Mark paused, his throat tightening as it always did when Emma asked about Sarah. "She would have loved them, Sunshine. She always said the best classroom was outdoors." He smiled, remembering Sarah's passion for teaching before illness had forced her to leave her kindergarten class. "In fact, she's the one who taught me all about the birds we hear on our walks." Emma nodded solemnly, processing this new piece of information about the mother she barely remembered. Then, with the resilience of childhood, her face brightened. "Race you to the big oak." She took off down the trail, her laughter echoing through the trees. Mark watched her go, adjusting his pace to keep her in sight while giving her the illusion of independence she craved. The morning stretched before them, full of possibility, and for now, the weight of unpaid bills and looming repairs faded into the background. Here, in these precious moments before the world demanded his attention, Mark Thompson was simply a father, sharing the morning with his daughter, their footsteps adding to the quiet symphony of the awakening forest. The old oak tree marked the beginning of their favorite trail, its massive branches reaching toward the cloudy Vermont sky like gnarled fingers. Emma had already claimed her usual spot at its base, her nature journal balanced on crossed legs, as she sketched the cluster of mushrooms she'd discovered poking through the fallen leaves. "Remember what I taught you about mushrooms?" Mark asked, settling beside her on a dry patch of ground. "Never touch, just look," Emma recited, her pencil moving carefully across the page. "And definitely never eat them unless an expert says it's okay." She paused, adding careful shading to her drawing. "Dad, do you think I could be a mushroom expert when I grow up?" Mark smiled, watching her tongue peek out in concentration as she worked. "You can be anything you set your mind to, Sunshine. Though I have to admit, I was kind of hoping you'd take over my handyman business." He winked, and she giggled, both of them knowing it was a running joke between them. The morning air was growing warmer, burning off the mist that had settled in the valley overnight. Through the canopy above, patches of sky played hide and seek with the clouds. Emma's journal pages rustled as she turned to a fresh sheet, the previous pages filled with weekly observations. A robin's nest from early spring, wildflowers from summer, and the changing colors of leaves as autumn crept in. "Look, Dad," Emma pointed to a branch where a downy woodpecker worked industriously. "It's the same one from last week. See the marking under its wing?" She quickly added it to her journal, noting the date and location with the methodical precision she'd developed over their months of nature walks. Mark watched her work, marveling at how these simple walks had sparked such curiosity in his daughter. The journal had been an impulse purchase, spotted in the window of the local bookstore when he'd been fixing their heating system. 3 extra repair jobs and 1 skipped lunch later, he'd been able to afford it. Seeing how she treasured it, how it fed her growing love of science and nature, made every sacrificed meal worth it. Their path wound deeper into the forest, following a trail that had become as familiar as the halls of their small cabin. Emma stopped occasionally to document new findings: a peculiar leaf, an interesting rock, a spider's web jeweled with dew. Mark carried their old digital camera, a graduation gift from his college days that still worked well enough to capture the occasional specimen Emma wanted to study more closely at home. "Dad," Emma began, in that thoughtful tone that often preceded her most challenging questions, "why do you think some people don't like living near the forest? Lisa at school said her mum would never live out here because it's too remote." She pronounced the word carefully, clearly having learned it recently. Mark considered his answer as they navigated around a fallen log, one they'd been watching decompose since spring. "Well, Sunshine, some people prefer having lots of neighbors and stores nearby. They like being able to order pizza delivery or go to the movies whenever they want. But we have better things," Emma declared with the certainty of childhood. We have owl concerts at night and berry patches in summer, and we have our special Friday walks. She stopped to press a particularly vibrant maple leaf between the pages of her journal. Plus, we can see the stars. Lisa says she can hardly see any from her house in town. Mark felt the familiar warmth spread through his chest, the one that came whenever Emma showed such contentment with their simple life. He'd spent countless nights worrying whether he was giving her enough, whether she was missing out on the experiences her classmates took for granted. Moments like these reassured him that maybe, just maybe, he was doing something right. A distant roll of thunder interrupted their reverie. Mark glanced at the sky visible through the leaves, noting the darkening clouds. Looks like we might need to cut today's adventure a bit short, kiddo. Race you to the lightning tree. Emma carefully tucked her journal away, zipping it securely in the waterproof pocket he'd added to their backpack. The lightning tree, an old birch split down the middle by a storm years ago, marked their usual turning point. They'd discovered it on their first walk after moving to the cabin, and Emma had declared it magical, convinced that the split was evidence of nature's power to create art. As they began their journey back, the first drops of rain filtered through the canopy above. Emma's laughter echoed through the trees as she dodged the falling drops, her purple jacket darting between trunks like a woodland sprite. Mark followed at an easy pace, keeping her in sight while letting her maintain her sense of adventure. Ding! Forest around them was coming alive with the approaching rain, the wind stirring leaves and branches in a rushing dance. Neither of them could have known that this ordinary Friday morning, with its familiar routines and simple pleasures, was about to become anything but ordinary. The Maxwell Industries boardroom occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that most people only saw in postcards. Sarah Maxwell sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her father's empty chair to her right, serving as a constant reminder of the legacy she now carried. The Wall Street Journal article projected on the screen behind her dubbed her America's Most Eligible CEO, a title that made her want to crawl out of her expertly tailored Chanel suit. Miss Maxwell, about the Thompson Holdings acquisition. The voice of her CFO droned on, but Sarah's attention had drifted to the rain streaking down the windows, distorting the city beyond into impressionistic brushstrokes. Somewhere, 38 floors below, real people were living real lives, unburdened by the weight of a $50 billion company and the expectations of being Charles Maxwell's only heir. Sarah? Her assistant's gentle prompt brought her back to the room. 12 faces watched her expectantly, their expressions a careful mix of deference and barely concealed ambition. She knew what they saw: the perfectly coiffed blonde hair, the carefully maintained poise, the mask of confident leadership she'd worn since inheriting the company 3 years ago at 27. "The acquisition can wait," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd learned to project. "We need more due diligence on their environmental impact." It was a reasonable delay tactic, one that would give her the breathing room she desperately needed. After the meeting, alone in her office, Sarah picked up the silver frame that held the last photo taken of her and her father. They were at their Vermont property, a secluded estate he'd bought as a surprise for her mother, who had passed before ever seeing it. In the photo, his smile held the same strain she now recognized in her own reflection. "You were right, Dad," she murmured, touching the glass gently. "Sometimes you need to step away to see things clearly." He'd said those words during their last conversation, when she'd found him looking through old family albums instead of preparing for the next day's board meeting. 2 days later, his heart had given out on the private tennis court of their Hampton estate. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 4 o'clock is here, Miss Maxwell, and TMZ is running another story about you and Senator Bradley's son." Sarah sighed, setting down the photo. "Cancel everything for the next week, Claire. Use the usual excuse, quarterly strategy retreat. But the Morrison Foundation Gala, send the donation, give my regrets. Sarah was already pulling up her private email, the one not monitored by corporate IT. Within minutes, she had booked a room at the small inn near their old Vermont property, using her mother's maiden name, Baker, as she always did when she needed to disappear. The town of Milton Falls barely warranted a dot on most maps, which was precisely why she chose it. Her father had kept the property despite her mother's passing, though he'd rarely visited. Now it sat empty most of the year, maintained by local staff who respected the family's privacy. Sarah had been there only twice since inheriting it, but something about the ancient forests and quiet mountains called to her, especially on days when the corporate armor felt too heavy to bear. An alert flashed on her phone. Another email from the board about succession planning and the importance of securing the Maxwell legacy. The subtext was clear. At 30, she should be focusing on marriage and producing an heir, not just running a Fortune 500 company. The society pages were full of speculation about her love life, each photo of her with a potential suitor dissected. For hidden meaning, Sarah slipped off her heels, padding across the plush carpet to the private bathroom where she kept an emergency go-bag. Within it was everything she needed to transform from Sarah Maxwell, CEO, to Sarah Baker, anonymous tourist. Well-worn jeans, hiking boots, and comfortable sweaters, chosen specifically because they would never catch a society photographer's eye. The late autumn rain had turned to sleet against her office windows, but the weather report for Vermont promised clear skies by morning. She had a 7-hour drive ahead of her, enough time to let the corporate world fall away. Her Range Rover, the modest one she kept for these escapes, not the chauffeured luxury SUV that usually transported her, was already waiting in the private garage below. "Claire," she called through the intercom one last time, "hold everything unless it's absolutely urgent. And Claire, thank you for understanding." Her assistant's reply carried a smile Sarah could hear. "Drive safely, Miss Maxwell. Find what you're looking for." Sarah took one last look at the city sprawling below, its lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in those ancient Vermont forests, she hoped, she might find a piece of herself that hadn't been shaped by boardrooms and balance sheets, if only for a little while. The morning had started like any other at the Milton Falls Inn, with Sarah slipping out before dawn to avoid the handful of other guests. Her father's property was technically off-limits while under maintenance, but she knew these trails from her childhood visits. What she hadn't counted on was the recent heavy rains transforming familiar paths into treacherous ground. The first step into the boggy area felt firm enough. The second sent her plunging knee-deep into thick, cold mud. Her instinctive jerk backward only made things worse. Suddenly she was waist-deep, her expensive hiking boots finding no purchase in the soupy earth. Her phone tucked into her jacket. Pocket might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did her. No signal as usual in these woods. "Help!" The cry tore from her throat before pride could stop it. "Somebody help!" The mud was at her ribs now, each movement drawing her deeper into the earth's cold embrace. Her designer coat, chosen for style rather than function, was saturated, adding weight she couldn't afford. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoed through the trees. Sarah's heart leaped. "Help, over here!" She tried to keep her voice steady, fighting the panic rising in her chest. The mud reached her shoulders, and for the first time in her adult life, Sarah Maxwell felt completely, utterly powerless. "Did you hear that?" Emma stopped mid-sentence in her description of the morning's mushroom findings, her head tilted like a curious bird. Mark paused, listening. Through the gentle patter of leftover raindrops, a faint cry reached them. His body tensed, parental instincts shifting from his daughter to the unknown voice in distress. "Stay here," he ordered Emma, already moving toward the sound. Then, remembering who he was talking to, he added, "Actually, come with me, but stay behind me." They moved quickly through the forest, Mark's mind racing through possibilities. An injured hiker, a lost tourist, The voice called again, closer now, with an edge of desperation that made him quicken his pace. They found her in a clearing he'd always warned Emma away from, known locally for its treacherous spring mud. The woman was submerged almost to her, neck-dark mud contrasting sharply with her pale, terrified face. "Don't move," Mark called, already shrugging off his backpack. "The more you struggle, the faster you'll sink." His voice carried the calm authority he'd learned as a volunteer firefighter years ago, before Emma was born. "Emma, get me that fallen branch." He pointed to a sturdy length of oak while he quickly unlaced his boots, securing them to the end of his belt. The woman's eyes tracked his movements, fear warring with confusion on her face. "My name's Mark, and that's my daughter Emma. We're going to get you out, but you need to do exactly what I say." He tested the ground carefully, finding a relatively solid path to where a young birch grew near the mud pit's edge. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she managed, her teeth chattering either from cold or fear. Probably both. Emma returned with the branch, a perfect length, thank God, and Mark quickly stripped off the smaller twigs. "Okay, Sarah, when I extend this branch to you, I want you to grab it with both hands. Don't pull, just hold on. I'm going to tie my belt to it for extra support. Emma, stand back by that big tree, and if I tell you to run for help, you run straight to Richardson's farm. Remember the way?" Emma nodded solemnly, her eyes huge but remarkably calm. Sarah had sunk another inch while they talked, the mud now brushing her chin. "Ready?" Mark positioned himself carefully, bracing against the birch. "Remember, don't pull, let me do the work." Sarah grabbed the branch with shaking hands, her grip white-knuckled but steady. Mark took a deep breath and began the careful process of extracting her from the earth's grasp. The mud released her reluctantly, making obscene sucking sounds as he gradually pulled her towards solid ground. When Sarah finally collapsed onto firm earth, she was covered head to toe in dark mud, shaking violently. Without hesitation, Mark shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Emma hovered nearby, clutching her nature journal like a talisman. "Thank you," Sarah managed between chattering teeth. I really thought." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Dad's good at fixing things," Emma offered proudly, "even stuck people." Mark smiled despite the situation. "Can you walk? Our cabin's about 15 minutes from here. You need to get warm and cleaned up." He looked at her mud-caked clothes. Even covered in muck, he could tell they cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. "We can try to save your coat, too." Sarah nodded, attempting to stand. Her legs buckled immediately, and Mark caught her before she could fall. Without further discussion, he scooped her up in his arms. She was surprisingly light, though the mud added considerable weight. "Emma, grab my pack and lead the way home. And watch your step. No more stuck people today, okay?" His daughter nodded, suddenly serious in her appointed role as guide. As they made their way back through the forest, Mark couldn't help but notice how Sarah's shivering gradually lessened, how she unconsciously curled closer to his chest for warmth. Her eyes kept darting to his face and away again, as if she couldn't quite believe what had happened. They walked in silence, accompanied only by the sounds of the forest and Emma's occasional commentary about landmarks. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting dappled shadows across their path. Sarah's breathing had steadied, but Mark could feel her heart racing where her body pressed against his. "Almost there," he assured her as their cabin came into view. "Emma, run ahead and start the hot water in the bathroom, and grab those clean towels from the laundry." Sarah stirred in his arms. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," Mark cut her off gently. "You're recovering. Besides, Emma's been wanting someone to try her hot chocolate recipe. She'll be crushed if you don't stay long enough for at least one cup." A small laugh escaped Sarah's mud-streaked face. "Well, I wouldn't want to crush any culinary dreams." Her voice was stronger now, revealing a warmth that matched the gratitude in her eyes. As Emma bounded ahead to prepare for their unexpected guest, Mark felt Sarah relax slightly in his arms. Neither of them could have known that this moment, him carrying her toward his modest cabin, both of them covered in mud. His daughter playing host would be the beginning of a story that would change all their lives forever. The cabin's warmth enveloped them as Mark carried Sarah through the door, careful not to bump her mud-covered form against the frame. The space was small but tidy, with worn furniture that spoke of years of careful use. A handmade quilt draped over the back of a weathered couch, and the air carried the lingering scent of morning coffee. "Bathrooms this way," Mark said, navigating the narrow hallway. "Emma's laid out towels and some clean clothes. They might not be what you're used to, but they're warm and dry." Sarah felt a sudden tightness in her throat at the simple kindness. The bathroom was modest. No marble countertops or heated floors like her Manhattan penthouse, but Emma had arranged everything with obvious care. A stack of mismatched but clean towels sat beside a pair of faded sweatpants and what looked like a well-loved flannel shirt. "The hot water can be a bit temperamental," Mark explained, finally setting her down. "Turn it all the way to hot first, then adjust slowly." He hesitated, clearly torn between proper etiquette and practical concerns. "Will you be okay? The mud can make things slippery." "I'll manage," Sarah assured him, touched by his worry. "I've survived worse than a tricky shower." Though at the moment she couldn't actually remember when. Once alone, Sarah peeled off her ruined clothes, laying them carefully in the old clawfoot tub. The coat was probably beyond saving, but somehow that thought didn't bother her as much as it should have. As she stepped under the stream of hot water, she heard Emma's voice floating through the thin walls, chattering excitedly about making hot chocolate the special way. The borrowed clothes felt like a warm embrace, soft from countless washes, smelling faintly of mountain air and whatever detergent they used. Sarah caught her reflection in the foggy mirror and barely recognized herself. Without her usual makeup and styled hair, wearing someone else's clothes, she looked real, human. The thought was strangely comforting. In the kitchen, she found Emma perched on a stool, carefully measuring cocoa powder into 3 mismatched ceramic mugs. Mark stood at the stove, stirring what smelled like homemade soup. The domestic scene hit Sarah with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had cooked for her without being paid to do so? "You look better," Mark observed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hungry?" "Starving, actually." Sarah accepted the offered seat at the small kitchen table, running her fingers over its scarred wooden surface. "Though I feel guilty imposing on your morning." "You're not imposing," Emma declared, carefully adding milk to her cocoa mixture. "Dad always says helping people is important. Plus, I've never seen anyone stuck in mud before. Can I write about it in my nature journal?" Sarah laughed, surprising herself with how natural it felt. "Of course, though maybe classify it under what not to do in the forest." Mark set a bowl of soup in front of her, something homemade with vegetables and barley, along with a chunk of crusty bread. "Emma's journal is becoming quite the wilderness survival. A guide," he said with obvious pride, though usually with less dramatic rescues. The soup was possibly the best thing Sarah had ever tasted, or maybe it was just the circumstances, making everything feel more vivid, more real. Emma delivered her hot chocolate with ceremonial gravity, watching eagerly as Sarah took her first sip. "It's perfect," Sarah said, and meant it. The chocolate was rich and not too sweet, with a hint of something cinnamon that made it special. "Dad taught me the recipe," Emma confided. "It was my mom's favorite." She said it simply, without the awkwardness adults often brought to such revelations. Sarah glanced at Mark, saw the flash of something in his eyes before he turned back to the stove. The photo on the wall caught her attention, a younger Mark, with a dark-haired woman and a baby, all of them laughing at something outside the frame. The image stirred something in her chest, a recognition of the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollar signs or stock prices. Outside, the rain had started again, drumming steadily on the cabin's roof. The sound was oddly soothing, making the kitchen feel even cozier, like a shelter from more than just the weather. Sarah cradled her mug, absorbing its warmth, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, felt no urge to check her phone or worry about what crisis might be unfolding in her absence. Instead, she listened to Emma's earnest explanations about the proper ratio of cocoa to milk, watched Mark move with easy confidence around his small kitchen, and allowed herself to simply be present in this unexpected moment of grace. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself drawn into the rhythm of their household with surprising ease. The rain had settled into a steady downpour, making any thoughts of leaving seem foolish. Emma had appointed herself tour guide, proudly, showing Sarah her collection of forest treasures, while Mark worked on some minor repairs around the cabin. "This is my favorite," Emma said, holding up a perfectly preserved butterfly wing in a small frame. "Dad helped me mount it after we found it last summer. He says sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones you find by accident." Sarah fingered the business card still hidden in her borrowed clothes pocket, her real identity pressing against her like a secret stone. The irony of Emma's words wasn't lost on her. "Your dad seems to know a lot about everything," she observed, watching Mark through the window as he patched a leak in the porch roof, his movements sure and practiced. "Not everything," Emma giggled. "He's terrible at French braiding, and he once tried to make spaghetti without water. But he can fix anything that's broken." She paused, considering. "Can you French braid? My friend Lisa's mom does hers every morning." Before Sarah could answer, she found herself seated on the couch, with Emma perched on the floor in front of her, small comb in hand. Her fingers remembered the motions from long ago sleepovers, back when she was just Sarah, not Sarah Maxwell, CEO. Mark came in from the rain to find them this way, Sarah carefully weaving Emma's dark hair into neat plaits, while his daughter chattered about school and science projects and her dream of becoming a researcher who studied everything interesting in the whole forest. "Well, that's a sight I never thought I'd see," he said softly, something warm in his voice that made Sarah's hands falter for just a moment. "Sarah's really good at braiding," Emma announced. "And she knows about different kinds of butterflies, too. Did you know some of them migrate thousands of miles, just like birds? Is that so?" Mark's eyes met Sarah's over Emma's head, curious but not prying. "Sounds like someone had a pretty good education." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I had opportunities to learn a lot of things, though I'm finding there's plenty I don't know. Like how soup made on a temperamental stove could taste better than any five-star restaurant meal, or how a child's simple trust could feel more valuable than a boardroom full of sycophants." The business card in her pocket seemed to grow heavier. It would be so easy to pull it out, to explain who she really was, but something held her back. Fear, perhaps, of shattering this fragile bubble of authenticity she'd stumbled into. "Dad," Emma's voice broke through her thoughts, "can Sarah stay for dinner? I want to show her my science project, and it's still raining, and—" "Slow down, sunshine," Mark chuckled. "I'm sure Sarah has places to be, people expecting her." "Actually," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself, "I'm free if it's not too much trouble." The thought of returning to her empty room at the inn held no appeal, not when compared to the warmth of this small cabin and its inhabitants. "No trouble," Mark said after a moment, "though fair warning, dinner won't be anything fancy. Just simple home cooking." "Simple sounds perfect," Sarah replied, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. As Mark moved to the kitchen, Sarah caught sight of herself in the window's reflection, wearing borrowed clothes, hair unstyled, face bare of makeup. In her other life, she would never have allowed anyone to see her so unpolished. Yet here she sat, braiding a little girl's hair while dinner cooked on a second-hand stove, feeling more herself than she had in years. Emma tilted her head back, looking up at Sarah with unguarded affection. "You do it just like Dad describes." "Mom doing it," she said quietly. "He says she always made time for special things, even when she was really busy." Sarah's hands stilled for a moment as the weight of that innocent comparison settled over her. In the kitchen, she could hear Mark humming softly as he worked, the sound mixing with the rain and the crackle of their old radio playing gentle folk music. The business card scratched against her leg through the soft fabric of the borrowed sweatpants, a reminder of the world she'd temporarily left behind. But for now, for this moment, she was just Sarah, learning that some of life's richest moments come without a price tag attached. The next morning arrived with cruel swiftness, sunlight streaming through gaps in the living room curtains, where Sarah had insisted on sleeping on the couch, despite Mark's offers to take it himself. Her borrowed clothes were neatly folded, and her mud-cake designer outfit had been carefully cleaned and dried by Mark's practiced hands, though the coat, as predicted, was a lost cause. The thank-you note she'd written sat propped against a coffee mug on the kitchen table, her careful handwriting betraying none of the turmoil she felt. How did one properly thank people for not just saving your life, but for inadvertently showing you everything missing from it? Dear Mark and Emma, thank you seems inadequate for everything you've done for me. The rescue, obviously, but also the warmth, the welcome, and Emma's perfect hot chocolate. You've shown me a kind of wealth I'd forgotten existed. I won't forget it, or you. With deepest gratitude, Sarah. She'd stopped herself from adding her last name, the lie of omission sitting uneasily in her stomach. The early morning silence wrapped around her as she gathered her things, preparing to slip away before the household woke. It felt cowardly, but the alternative, facing them one last time, maintaining her deception while fighting the inexplicable. Urge to stay seemed impossible. You're leaving without saying goodbye. Sarah startled at Emma's voice, turning to find the girl standing in the hallway in cartoon-patterned pajamas, her newly braided hair slightly mussed from sleep. I didn't want to disturb anyone, Sarah managed, the excuse sounding hollow even. To her own ears, Dad says proper goodbyes are important, Emma said with the frank wisdom of childhood. He says they give people closure. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Closure. As if this brief interlude in their lives needed to be neatly wrapped up and filed away. As if she could simply return to board meetings and charity galas and forget the feeling of Emma's hair between her fingers, or the way Mark's eyes crinkled when he smiled. Emma, who are you talking to? Mark's voice preceded him into the kitchen, and Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of him, sleep-rumpled and genuine in worn flannel pajama pants and a faded t-shirt. Sarah's trying to leave without saying goodbye, Emma reported, managing to sound both disapproving and worried at the same time. Mark's eyes met Sarah's, and she saw understanding there, and something else that made her breath catch. Is that so? He said softly. Well, we can't have that. Emma, why don't you get Sarah's care package while I start some coffee? Care package, Sarah echoed, but Emma had already darted away. Just some trail mix and emergency supplies, Mark explained, moving to the coffee maker with practiced ease. In case you decide to go hiking again, though maybe stick to the marked paths next time. The gentle teasing in his voice made her smile despite herself. I think I've learned my lesson. About wandering off trail. Have you? His question carried a weight that had nothing to do with hiking paths, and Sarah found she couldn't quite meet his eyes. Emma returned with a small cloth bag, presenting it proudly. I put in my spare trail map, and some of Dad's trail mix, and a little first aid kit, and she hesitated, then pulled something from her pocket. And this, so you can remember us. It was a page from her nature journal, carefully torn out. On it, Emma had drawn the three of them in her childish but detailed style, Mark carrying Sarah from the mud, Emma leading the way home. Beneath it, she'd written, "The day we found Sarah," in careful letters. Emma, honey, that's from your journal, Sarah protested, her throat tight. You should keep it. I have the memory, Emma said with a shrug. Besides, I made a copy for my journal. This one's for you. Sarah accepted the drawing with trembling hands, carefully tucking it into her salvaged pants pocket alongside the business card. Her two worlds literally overlapping now. At least stay for coffee, Mark offered, holding up a chipped mug that she recognized as the one she'd used yesterday. Give us a proper goodbye. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the steam rising from the coffee maker, turning ordinary kitchen dust motes into dancing gold. Emma had climbed onto her usual stool, already reaching for the cocoa powder with a hopeful expression. Outside, birds were beginning their morning chorus, and somewhere in Manhattan, a company worth billions waited for her return. Sarah's phone, finally dried out and powered up, would be filled with messages demanding her attention. Her carefully constructed escape had just become much more complicated than she'd planned. But for now, coffee sounds perfect, she said, setting down her bag and accepting the offered mug, allowing herself one more moment in this world she'd stumbled into by accident. A week passed, marked by autumn rain and lingering thoughts. In the cabin, Emma's latest drawing hung on the refrigerator, 3 figures rendered in careful colored pencil, the middle one suspended in brown scribbles meant to be quicksand. She'd spent hours getting the details right, the red of Sarah's mud-stained jacket, the determined set of her father's shoulders as he pulled their mysterious guest to safety. Mark found his eyes drawn to it every morning as he made coffee, remembering the weight of Sarah in his arms, the trust in her eyes as he'd carried her home. The kitchen seemed quieter now, though Emma filled it with her usual chatter about school and science projects. Something was missing, like a song half remembered, its melody just out of reach. "Dad?" Emma's voice broke through his thoughts as she spread her homework across the kitchen table. "Do you think Sarah liked my drawing, the one I gave her?" Mark smiled, running a hand over his daughter's hair, still neatly braided in the style Sarah had taught her. "I'm sure she loved it, Sunshine. Who wouldn't? Then why hasn't she visited? She knows where we live." The question held all the direct simplicity of childhood, hitting Mark with unexpected force. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated lives. He began, then stopped, recognizing the inadequacy of the explanation. Truth was, he'd wondered the same thing. The mysterious Sarah had left an impression deeper than her brief stay would suggest, in the way Emma now insisted on making hot chocolate fancy style, in the empty mug that somehow remained in its spot by the coffee maker, in the quiet moments. When the rain drummed on the roof and Mark found himself straining to hear footsteps on the porch. "She seemed kind of sad sometimes," Emma observed, pencil tapping thoughtfully against her math homework. "Not on the outside, but in her eyes, like Mrs. Rodriguez at school when she talks about her old home in Puerto Rico." Mark paused in his dinner preparations, struck by his daughter's perception. There had been something in Sarah's manner, a kind of wistful appreciation for their simple routines, as if she were watching a play she longed to join, but couldn't. "Maybe she had to go back to her own life," he said carefully. "Sometimes people come into our lives for just a moment, but that doesn't make the moment less special." Emma considered this, her small face serious. "Like Mom." Mark's hands stilled on the vegetables he was chopping. "Yeah, Sunshine, like Mom." Though the comparison stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. Sarah's absence felt different, not the clean break of death, but something unfinished. A story interrupted mid-chapter. The evening settled around them, bringing its familiar routines. Emma worked on her homework while Mark prepared dinner, the radio playing softly in the background. Outside, the first stars appeared through breaks in the clouds, and somewhere an owl began its nightly surveillance. "Dad?" Emma's voice came again, softer now. "I think she kept the piece of my journal because she needed it more than I did. Like how you kept Mom's yellow sweater even though it had holes." Mark looked at his daughter, really looked at her, marveling at how wisdom could come from such unexpected places. "When did you get so smart?" Emma grinned, the serious moment passing. "I've always been smart. Mrs. Baker says I get it from both sides of my family tree." The evening wound down as it always did. Homework finished, dinner eaten, dishes washed. Emma's bedtime routine included a new step now, checking her braids in the mirror, adjusting them with careful fingers just as Sarah had shown her. Mark watched from the doorway, his heart doing that strange skip it had started doing whenever. Something reminded him of their unexpected guest. Later, After Emma was asleep, Mark sat on the porch with his evening coffee. The night air carried the sharp edge of approaching winter, and the forest was alive with small sounds. His eyes drifted to the trail where he'd carried Sarah home, remembering how light she'd felt despite the mud, how her breath had warmed his neck as she'd held on. The drawing on the refrigerator was visible through the kitchen window, Emma's artistic tribute to their adventure. But it wasn't complete, Mark realized. It showed the rescue, the dramatic moment, but not the quiet ones that followed. Not Sarah teaching Emma to braid hair, or the way she'd fit so naturally at their small kitchen table, or how her laughter had filled spaces in their home they hadn't known were empty. Mark sipped his cooling coffee, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Somewhere out there, Sarah was living her own life, carrying a piece of Emma's journal with her. He hoped, wherever she was, she remembered them as more than just a rescue story. He hoped she remembered the way Emma's face had lit up at her praise, the warmth of shared soup on a rainy day, the simple piece of belonging, if only for a moment, to their small family circle. The property deed sat heavy in Sarah's designer handbag as she guided her Range Rover down the familiar dirt road. 2 weeks of sleepless nights and endless meetings had led to this moment. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Sarah Maxwell, who routinely negotiated billion-dollar deals, nervous about approaching a small cabin in the woods. The afternoon sun caught the autumn foliage, transforming the forest into a cathedral of gold and crimson. She'd changed clothes 3 times before leaving the inn, finally settling on simple jeans and a sweater that cost more than she wanted to think about. Emma's drawing rode in her pocket, transferred from outfit to outfit over the past weeks. Its edges softened from frequent handling. The cabin looked smaller than she remembered, more weathered. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she could see Emma's purple jacket hanging by the door. Sarah sat in her car for a long moment, remembering how it had felt to be just Sarah, wrapped in borrowed clothes and simple kindness. A knock on her window made her jump. Emma stood there grinning through the glass, her breath fogging the window. "You came back." The simple joy in her voice made Sarah's carefully prepared speech catch in her throat. Mark appeared on the porch, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His expression was unreadable, but something in his stance told Sarah he'd been expecting her, or at least hoping for her return. "Going to sit in there all afternoon?" he called, a hint of teasing in his voice that gave her courage. Sarah stepped out into the crisp autumn air, immediately enveloped in Emma's enthusiastic hug. "Dad kept your coffee mug in the same spot," Emma informed her conspiratorially. "And I've been practicing my braids every day." "Emma," Mark's gentle warning carried from the porch, "let Sarah breathe." But Sarah found herself clutching Emma just as tightly, inhaling the simple scent of children's shampoo and fall leaves. "I missed you too," she whispered, surprising herself with her honesty. Mark had descended the porch steps, moving toward them with careful grace. He looked exactly as she remembered, strong, steady, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he watched. Their reunion. "Welcome back, stranger." The word stung more than it should have. Sarah straightened, one hand still on Emma's shoulder. "About that, I need to tell you something, both of you." "Hot chocolate first," Emma declared, grabbing Sarah's hand. "You can talk while I make it fancy style." Mark's soft chuckle broke the tension. "Better do as she says." Emma's gotten quite particular about her hosting duties. The cabin's interior wrapped around Sarah like a warm blanket. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The worn furniture, the family photos, Emma's, artwork on the fridge. But now she noticed other things too. The slight sag in the roof visible through the window, the drafty spots near the doors, the way Mark had carefully patched and maintained everything to stretch their limited resources. Emma bustled around the kitchen with exaggerated ceremony, carefully measuring cocoa powder, while Mark leaned against the counter, watching Sarah with quiet intensity. The property deed in her bag seemed to pulse like a living thing. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," Sarah began, her fingers tracing the familiar chip in her designated mug. "My name is Sarah Maxwell. as in Maxwell Industries. She forced herself to meet Mark's eyes, watching for the moment of recognition. It came slowly, then all at once. She saw him straighten, his easy manner shifting as the implications sank in. Emma, focused on her cocoa preparation, remained blissfully oblivious. The day you found me, I was hiding. From my life, my responsibilities, my board of directors. The words tumbled out now, weeks of practice speeches dissolving into raw truth. I own property near here, the old Morrison estate. I came out to breathe, and then I got stuck, quite literally, and you... She gestured helplessly. You saved me, in more ways than one. Mark's expression had grown carefully neutral. Sarah Maxwell, he said slowly, testing the name. The Billionaire CEO. Done, Emma announced triumphantly, presenting 3 mugs of hot chocolate with flourish. I added extra marshmallows because it's a special occasion. Sarah accepted her mug, grateful for the momentary reprieve. The chocolate was perfect, of course. Everything about this place was perfect, in its own imperfect way. I came back because I have a proposal, she said finally, reaching for her bag. One that could change everything if you'll let it. Mark's old toolbox sat open on the kitchen counter, his father's worn wrench still warm from fixing the leaky faucet. He ran his thumb over its scratched surface as Sarah spread the property deed and related papers across their small table. The contrast was stark. Her manicured hands against his weathered furniture, legal documents next to Emma's homework papers. It's a cottage on the Morrison estate, Sarah was explaining, her composed CEO voice at odds with the nervous way she kept. Touching Emma's drawing in her pocket. Recently renovated, with plenty of room for both of you. There's a groundskeeper position open, full benefits, good salary. Emma could attend Milton Falls Academy. They have an excellent science program. Emma, who had been quietly drawing at the far end of the table, looked up sharply. The school with the big laboratory, where they do real experiments. Emma, Mark's voice carried a gentle warning. Could you give Sarah and me a moment to talk? His daughter's face fell slightly, but she gathered her art supplies without complaint. I'll be in my room, working on my project about forest decomposition, she announced, managing to sound both dutiful and pointed at the same time. Once Emma's footsteps had faded upstairs, Mark turned back to Sarah. Why? The simple question seemed to catch her off guard. Why what? Why this? He gestured to the papers, the deed, the future she was trying to hand them on a silver platter. Is this guilt? Gratitude? Some billionaire's idea of paying a debt? Sarah flinched at his tone, and Mark immediately regretted his sharpness. But the toolbox caught his eye again, his father's tools, passed down along with lessons about honest work and self-reliance. I've managed to keep a roof over our heads for 8 years. We're not charity cases. That's not... Sarah stopped, visibly collecting herself. Do you know what I thought about most after I left here? Not the rescue, not the mud. I thought about Emma's hot chocolate, about the way you showed her how to properly measure ingredients, how you turned a simple task into a lesson about precision and care. I thought about how this cabin, with all its worn edges and patched places, feels more like a home than my penthouse ever has. She stood, moving to the window where Emma's latest nature drawings were taped to the glass. When I was her age, I had every advantage money could buy. Private tutors, expensive schools, summer programs at Harvard. But no one ever taught me to make hot chocolate. No one ever showed me how to find joy in simple things. Mark watched her, this powerful woman, who somehow looked lost in his humble kitchen. The setting sun painted her hair gold, reminding him of how she'd looked in borrowed clothes, all pretense stripped away. I'm not offering charity, Mark. I'm offering an opportunity for all of us. She turned back to him, and there was something raw in her expression. Emma has such potential, such curiosity about the world. The Academy would nurture that. And you shouldn't have to patch and mend everything alone. I manage, he said quietly, but his eyes drifted to the corner where water damage was beginning to show through his latest repair. But you don't have to just manage. Sarah's voice was soft now, all CEO authority gone. When I was here, watching you with Emma, seeing how you've built this life for her, it made me realize how empty my own life has become. All my success, my wealth, what good is it if I can't use it to help the people who've shown me what really matters? Mark picked up his father's wrench, its familiar weight grounding him. And what happens when you get tired of playing fairy godmother to the poor handyman and his daughter? When your board of directors or society friends raise their eyebrows at your charity project? Is that what you think this is? There was hurt in her voice now, and something else. Something that made Mark's heart beat faster. I'm not playing at anything. These past 2 weeks, trying to go back to my normal life, nothing felt right. Every board meeting, every charity gala, every carefully orchestrated social event, it all felt hollow. I kept thinking about Emma's drawing, about your coffee in the morning, about how it felt to be just Sarah. She moved closer, close enough, that Mark could smell her subtle perfume mixing with the cabin's wood smoke. I'm not offering to rescue you, Mark Thompson. Maybe I'm asking you to rescue me again. Not from quicksand this time, but from a life that's all surface and no substance. The wrench in Mark's hand seemed heavier now, weighted with decisions and possibilities. Through the window, he could see Emma's purple jacket swaying slightly in the evening breeze, a bright splash of color against the weathered wood of their porch. His daughter's future, wrapped up in papers on his kitchen table. His pride, wrestling with his dreams for her. The tabloid arrived with the morning mail, its garish headlines screaming across the checkout counter of Milton Falls' only grocery store. Maxwell Ires's secret mountain man, exclusive photos inside. Sarah's face, captured in an unguarded moment as she'd left the cabin yesterday, stared up from the glossy page. Behind her, slightly blurred but unmistakable, stood Mark and Emma on their porch. Betty Chen, who'd run the store for 30 years, set the magazine aside when Mark came in for his usual coffee and bread. Her sympathetic glance told him she'd already seen it. The same look followed him down every aisle, from parents he knew from Emma's school, from neighbors he'd done repairs for, from people who'd never given him a second glance before. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. First, it was local calls from people he knew. Then unfamiliar numbers started appearing. Reporters, he realized, already trying to piece together the story of the handyman who'd caught a billionaire's eye. The cabin's driveway was blocked by 2 news vans when he returned home. Emma, thank God, was already at school, but he could see cameras tracking his approach. The quiet life they'd built here was evaporating in the harsh glare of public scrutiny. "Mr. Thompson!" A reporter rushed forward, microphone extended. "Can you comment on your relationship with Sarah Maxwell? Sources say she's been secretly visiting your home. Is it true she's buying you a luxury property?" Mark pushed past them. Without a word, his grocery bag clutched like a shield. Inside, his landline was ringing, the old phone Sarah had teased him about keeping. Through the window, he could see more vehicles arriving, drawn by the scent of a story too juicy to resist. The reclusive billionaire CEO and the rustic mountain handyman. His cell phone buzzed again. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. Her real number, not the temporary one she'd been using. He let it go to voicemail, just like the previous 5 calls. The betrayal sat heavy in his chest, though a quiet voice in his head argued that this wasn't her fault. She'd been careful, discreet. Someone must have followed her. The landline stopped ringing, only to start again immediately. This time he picked up, recognizing the school's number. "Mr. Thompson?" Emma's principal sounded harried. "We have a situation here. Reporters have gathered outside the school. They're trying to photograph Emma through the classroom windows. We've moved the children to the cafeteria, but I'll be right there." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, tight with an emotion he couldn't name. The drive to school was a blur of autumn colors and churning thoughts. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows fell into place behind him halfway there. Sarah's security team, he realized. The same ones who'd failed to keep her privacy intact now moved to protect his daughter. Emma was waiting in the principal's office, her face pale but composed. She clutched her nature journal like a talisman. "Dad," she said as soon as he appeared in the doorway, "everyone's asking about Sarah. Tracy showed me the picture on her mum's phone. Why are they calling you a fortune hunter? What does that mean?" The principal cleared her throat. "We've had calls from several news outlets requesting interviews, and some of our more affluent parents have expressed concerns about the attention this might bring to the school." "Concerns?" Mark repeated flatly. 8 years of being a responsible parent, of volunteering at school events, of helping maintain the building in his spare time, all suddenly overshadowed by his association with Sarah Maxwell. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Sarah herself swept in, flanked by serious-looking men in dark suits. She'd abandoned any pretense of casual dress, wearing what Mark assumed was her CEO armor. An impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than his truck. "Mark," she began, then saw Emma and faltered slightly. "I'm so sorry. My security team is handling it, but someone sold photos to the tabloids. They must have followed me yesterday." "Handling it?" Mark gestured toward the window, where more news vans were arriving. "Like they handled your privacy." "Our privacy?" "Dad," Emma's small voice cut through his anger. "You're using your mad voice. The one you said we should never use with people we care about." The simple observation hit him like a physical blow. Sarah looked equally stricken, her CEO facade cracking to reveal the woman who'd sat in his kitchen drinking hot chocolate. "Mr. Thompson," one of the suits stepped forward, "we have a safe house prepared. We can move you and your daughter there until this dies down." "A safe house," Mark repeated incredulously, "because that's what Emma needs, to be hustled away from. Her home, her school, her friends, to hide like we've done something wrong." "It's standard procedure in situations like this," the security man began, but Sarah cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No," she said firmly, "no more hiding." She turned to Mark, her eyes pleading. "Let me hold a press conference. I'll explain everything. How you saved my life, how I came to care for both of you. We can get ahead of this narrative." "Narrative." The word tasted bitter. "Is that what this is to you? A story to be managed?" "Of course not." Sarah stepped closer, seemingly unconscious of their audience. "You know what you and Emma mean to me. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing how you live, it's changed everything. But my world, it's different. Everything gets twisted, commodified. I was trying to protect you from this. By lying?" The hurt spilled out before he could stop it. "By playing at being just another hiker who stumbled into our lives? Was any of it real, Sarah? Or were we just your taste of how the other half lives?" Emma's sharp intake of breath made them both turn. She sat very straight in her chair, her nature journal open to the drawing of their first meeting. "You promised," she said to Sarah, her voice small but steady. "When you taught me to braid my hair, you promised you'd come back. You said promises matter more than money." Sarah moved to kneel beside Emma's chair, heedless of her expensive suit against the institutional carpet. "I meant it," she said softly. "Everything that happened here was real, more real than anything in my other life." The principal's phone buzzed again, making them all jump. Outside, the crowd of reporters had grown. Mark could see his neighbors gathering too, watching the spectacle unfold. His quiet life, his daughter's stability, the fragile connection he'd allowed himself to feel with Sarah, all of it seemed to be dissolving in the harsh light of public scrutiny. "Dad?" Emma's voice drew his attention back. She held out her nature journal, opened to a new page. While they'd been talking, she'd been drawing. Their cabin, surrounded not by reporters, but by protective trees. In the drawing, 3 figures stood on the porch, him, Emma, and Sarah, while dark clouds loomed but couldn't quite reach them. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "the best shelter isn't hiding, it's standing together." Out of the mouths of babes, Mark thought, meeting Sarah's tear-bright eyes over their daughter's head. Their daughter. The thought came unbidden, but once there, it refused to leave. The world outside was waiting to tear apart whatever story they tried to tell, but in here, in this moment, Emma had drawn their truth with the simple wisdom of a child's heart. Emma's science project lay half-finished on the kitchen table, a meticulous study of forest decomposition now interrupted by the chaos of their new reality. 3 days had passed since the tabloid explosion, and their quiet life had transformed into a careful dance of timing and avoidance. Mark found himself checking for cameras before letting Emma play in the yard, while their usual morning hikes had become impossible due to photographers hiding in the woods. "Look, Dad," Emma said, pointing to her project display. She'd arranged leaves in various stages of decay, each carefully labeled and documented. "Mrs. Peterson says if I can finish this by next week, I could qualify for the regional science fair, the one at Milton Falls Academy." The mention of the academy made Mark's chest tighten. He'd been avoiding Sarah's calls, letting them go to a voicemail while he tried to sort through his tangled emotions. But Emma's project served as a stark reminder of what was at stake, not just their privacy, but his daughter's future. "That's impressive work, Sunshine," he said, examining her detailed notes. Her handwriting had grown neater over the past weeks, he noticed, a small change that spoke volumes about her growing maturity. "The academy would be lucky to have you, but we can't afford it," Emma finished matter-of-factly. "I heard you telling Mrs. Chen at the store. Before everything." Mark sat heavily in his kitchen chair, the same one where Sarah had sat explaining her proposal just days ago. "Emma, it's okay, Dad." She continued arranging her leaves, not meeting his eyes. "I know you work really hard, and I love our school. It's just—" She hesitated, then pulled something from her project folder, a printed brochure for the Academy's science program. "They have a real laboratory and a greenhouse, and they do experiments with actual scientists." The brochure was worn at the edges, clearly read many times. Mark recognized it as the same one Sarah had brought with her property deed proposal. His daughter had kept it, nurturing a dream she was too kind to push him about. A knock at the door made them both freeze. They'd learned to dread unexpected visitors. Reporters were getting craftier about finding ways to approach them, but through the window, Mark recognized Sarah's driver, James, standing on their porch with a large envelope. "Mr. Thompson," James said formally when Mark opened the door. "Miss Maxwell asked me to deliver this personally. She wants you to know she's respecting your space, but there are some time-sensitive matters regarding Miss Emma's potential enrollment that need attention." The envelope contained admission papers for Milton Falls Academy, already marked with sticky notes showing where signatures were needed. A handwritten note in Sarah's elegant script sat on top. "Mark, I understand if you need time, but Emma's education shouldn't have to wait for us to figure things out. The Academy's science fair is next weekend. They've agreed to let her enter as a prospective student. No strings attached. This isn't about us. It's about her future." "Sarah." Emma watched him read the note, her fingers absently tracing the decay. Patterns on her leaves. The project was good, better than good. It showed real scientific methodology, the kind of thinking that deserved nurturing in a proper laboratory, not just their kitchen table. "Dad?" Emma's voice was careful, measured, in the way children are when they're trying very hard not to hope too much. "Is that from Sarah?" "Yes." He set the papers down next to her project. "She thinks you should enter the science fair at the academy." Emma's face lit up before she carefully controlled her expression. "But what about the reporters? And everything?" "That happened." Mark looked at his daughter's project, at the careful documentation of how things broke down to create new growth, at the way she'd traced nature's process of turning endings into beginnings. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "we have to decide what matters more, staying comfortable or growing into something new." He picked up the enrollment papers, weighing them in his hand. They represented so much more than just school admission. They were Sarah's way of saying she wasn't giving up, that she understood his need for space, but wouldn't let Emma's opportunities slip away while they figured things out. "What do you think, Sunshine? Ready to show those academy scientists what real forest research looks like?" Emma's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. She threw her arms around him, careful even in her excitement not to disturb her leaf specimens. "Can I call Sarah to tell her? Please?" Mark hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think it's time we all talked." Outside, the late afternoon sun filtered through autumn leaves, casting patterns across Emma's project that reminded Mark of the way light had played across Sarah's hair in their kitchen. Sometimes love was about grand gestures and dramatic rescues, but sometimes he was learning. It was about knowing when to step back, when to let go of pride, when to recognize that growth, like Emma's decomposing leaves, required both endings and beginnings. The rain-soaked letter trembled in Mark's hands as he stood on the academy's grounds, the elegant stone buildings looming through the downpour. Emma's science project had earned her not just admission to the fair, but an invitation to demonstrate her research for the school's environmental science department. The letter praised her remarkable insight into ecological systems and her innovative approach to data collection. He'd come to drop off her project materials early, wanting to ensure everything was perfect for tomorrow's presentation. What he hadn't expected was to find Sarah there, walking the grounds with the school's board of trustees. Their eyes met across the rain-swept courtyard, and for a moment neither moved. She broke away from her group first, murmuring something to them before walking toward him. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement, designer umbrella held carefully. Over her impeccable suit, the distance between them felt both infinite and microscopic. "You came," she said simply, stopping just out of reach. "I was hoping—" She caught herself, professional mask slipping. "Emma's project is causing quite a buzz. The science department chair called it groundbreaking." "That's not why you're here, though, is it?" Mark's voice came out rougher than intended. "These aren't just school trustees. I recognize the man in the grey suit from magazine covers. He's on your board of directors." Sarah's composure wavered. "They insisted on a meeting about my recent behavior, my concerning choices in personal associations." The bitterness in her voice was new. "They're worried about company image, stock prices, succession plans." "Exactly what I was afraid of." Mark held up the sodden letter. "This is Emma's future we're talking about, her chances. I won't have it tangled up in corporate politics and scandal." Mark: "No, Sarah. You sweep in with your proposals and your private schools and your perfect solutions, but look what follows. Reporters harassing my daughter, corporate boards judging our association, our whole lives turned into some sort of modern fairy tale for the media to pick apart." The rain intensified, but neither moved for shelter. Sarah's umbrella tilted, sending a cascade of water between them. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Sweeping in like some fairy godmother?" Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm trying to break free of their expectations, their constant judgment. When I'm with you and Emma, I'm not the Maxwell heiress or the CEO or the most eligible billionaire. I'm just Sarah. The Sarah who gets hot chocolate made specially for her, who learns to braid hair, who finally understands what a real home feels like. And what happens when you get tired of playing house, when the novelty of our simple life wears off?" The fears that had been haunting him spilled out. "Emma adores you. She's already lost one mother. I won't let her lose another person she loves because reality finally sets in." Sarah stepped forward suddenly, close enough that her umbrella covered them both. "You think this is playing house? Mark, I haven't slept properly since that first day you carried me out of the mud. I sit in board meetings, thinking about Emma's nature journals. I come home to my empty penthouse and miss the sound of your coffee maker, the creaky step on your porch, the way you look at me like you see past everything I'm supposed to be to who I really am." She reached into her suit jacket and pulled out a folded paper, Emma's drawing, now protected in a plastic sleeve but clearly well handled. "This is reality to me now. Everything else feels like the pretense." A door opened somewhere behind them, voices carrying across the courtyard. Sarah's board members were emerging, but she didn't turn around. "They want me to issue a statement." she continued, voice low and intense. Deny any romantic involvement, paint it as a simple rescue story that the media overblew. Put it to bed, they said, like what I feel for you and Emma could be dismissed with a press release. And what do you feel? The question escaped before Mark could stop it. Sarah's free hand came up to touch his cheek, heedless of who might see. Terror, she whispered. Complete terror. Because I've spent my whole life being what other people needed me to be. The perfect daughter, the capable CEO, the suitable heiress. But with you and Emma, I finally want to be myself. And that terrifies me more than any corporate takeover or media scandal ever could. The rain drummed against her umbrella, creating a private world in the midst of the academic courtyard. Behind them, voices grew closer. But in that moment, Mark saw past the designer clothes and corporate armor to the woman who'd sat in his kitchen wearing borrowed sweats, teaching his daughter to braid hair. I'm terrified too, he admitted softly. Terrified of trusting this, of letting Emma trust it, of believing in fairy tales. Then let's write our own story, Sarah said. No fairy godmothers, no glass slippers, just us, figuring it out together. Messy and real and absolutely terrifying. The choice hung between them, as tangible as the rain. The hospital bracelet seemed impossibly small around Emma's wrist as she lay in the emergency room bed, her normally rosy cheeks pale against the stark white sheets. What had started as a mild fever during her science fair presentation had rapidly escalated into a frightening bout of pneumonia, her excitement about showing her project giving way to labored breathing and alarming coughs. Mark sat beside her bed, his large hand engulfing her smaller one, watching the monitors with the kind of intensity he usually reserved for complex repairs. The private room, arranged within minutes of their arrival thanks to a phone call from Sarah, felt both like a luxury and a reminder of how quickly their worlds had entangled. Dad, Emma's voice was weak but determined. Did they save my project? Shh, sunshine. Don't worry about that now. But he smiled despite his concern, recognizing the same stubborn focus he often saw in the mirror. Sarah has it. She's keeping it safe. As if summoned by her name, Sarah appeared in the doorway, still in her elegant suit from the science fair, but looking uncharacteristically disheveled. She'd been the one to notice Emma's distress first, recognizing the shallow breathing and sudden pallor, even as the young scientist had continued explaining decomposition rates to impressed faculty members. The pulmonologist is on her way, Sarah announced quietly, moving to Emma's other side. Dr. Patterson, she's the best in New England. She reached out to smooth Emma's hair, the gesture so natural it made Mark's chest ache. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Like a science experiment, Emma managed, attempting a smile, but not the fun kind. The monitors beeped steadily as Sarah settled into the chair opposite Mark, creating a protective triangle around Emma's bed. Neither adult mentioned the media circus that had erupted outside when word got out that Sarah Maxwell was personally overseeing the care of a local child, their private drama now playing out in full public view. You know what this reminds me of? Emma's voice was thoughtful, despite its weakness. When you were stuck in the mud, Sarah. Everyone working together to help, even though it was scary. Sarah's eyes met Mark's across the bed, understanding passing. Between them, they'd been so caught up in their own fears and hesitations, in the complications of merging their worlds, that they'd missed what Emma had seen clearly all along. When someone you love is in trouble, you don't stop to wonder if helping them will complicate your life. The door opened again, admitting a distinguished-looking doctor who moved immediately to examine Emma. Mark started to rise to give her space to work, but Emma's grip on his hand tightened. Stay, she whispered. Both of you. Sarah reached across the bed, her free hand finding Mark's empty one, completing their circle around Emma. The doctor worked efficiently, asking questions, adjusting medications, making notes. If she found anything unusual about a billionaire CEO holding hands with a handyman over a child's hospital bed, she didn't show it. "The aggressive antibiotics are helping," she reported finally, "but she'll need close monitoring for the next 48 hours, and then complete rest for at least 2 weeks. No school, no excitement, clean air only." "We'll take her to the cottage," Sarah said immediately, then caught herself and looked at Mark. If that's okay. It has a state-of-the-art air filtration system, and it's completely private. No reporters, no chaos, just rest and recovery." Mark looked down at their joined hands, then at Emma's pale face. The monitors beeped steadily, measuring out moments of decision. All his carefully constructed arguments about independence and pride seemed hollow now, stripped away by the simple reality of his daughter's needs. "The cottage," he agreed softly. "But we do this together. No more separate worlds." Sarah's grip on his hand tightened. "Together," she echoed. Emma stirred slightly, fighting sleep but smiling. "Can we still have hot chocolate there?" "Every day," Sarah promised. "And when you're better, I'll show you the greenhouse. It's full of plants you can study for your next project. Dad, too." Emma's eyes were drifting closed, the medications finally winning. "Dad, too," Sarah confirmed, her thumb tracing gentle circles on Mark's hand. "We're a package deal now, remember?" As Emma fell into healing sleep, the monitors creating a gentle rhythm in the quiet room, Mark studied their linked hands, Sarah's elegant manicure next to his work-roughened fingers, both holding on to what mattered most. Outside, the world waited with its judgments and expectations, its headlines and social complications. But in here, watching over their sleeping child, they were simply a family finding its way forward. The new house keys felt foreign, yet familiar in Mark's hand as he unlocked the cottage door, carefully balancing a sleeping Emma against his shoulder. The building was smaller than he'd expected, charming rather than ostentatious, with a wraparound porch that reminded him of their cabin. Sarah had clearly chosen it with them in mind. "The main bedroom is through here," she whispered, leading them down a hallway warmed by honey-colored woodwork. "I had them set up the medical equipment exactly as Dr. Patterson specified." Emma stirred slightly as Mark laid her in the large bed, but didn't wake. The prescribed medications were keeping her comfortable, helping her body fight the pneumonia that had turned their worlds upside down. In sleep, her color was better, her breathing easier in the filtered air. Sarah moved around the room with quiet efficiency, adjusting monitors, checking the humidifier settings. She'd traded her business suit for soft loungewear, looking more like the Sarah who'd sat in their kitchen than the CEO who'd faced down her board of directors yesterday. "They're not happy with my decision," she said softly, sensing his thoughts as she tucked a blanket around Emma. "The board. They spent 2 hours trying to convince me that taking a leave of absence to care for my friend's daughter was corporate suicide." "What did you tell them?" Mark moved to the window, taking in the view of the estate's carefully maintained grounds. Somewhere beyond the trees, reporters were still camped at the main gate, but here they were cocooned in privacy. "I told them that some things matter more than stock prices." She joined him at the window, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Then I introduced them to my new head of corporate social responsibility, Claire, my assistant. She's been running things behind the scenes for years anyway, and she fully supports our plans for expanding educational access in rural communities." Mark turned to her, understanding dawning. "You're using this whole situation to launch new initiatives. Why not?" A hint of the CEO sparkled in her eyes. "The media wants a story. I'll give them one, about breaking down barriers, about recognizing that talent and potential exist everywhere, not just in privileged circles." Emma's science project is actually the perfect example. A brilliant study of environmental systems, created on a kitchen table by a girl who deserved better resources. "You're amazing," Mark said simply, and watched a blush color her cheeks. "Terrifying sometimes, but amazing." Terrifying? She arched an eyebrow. The way you take life's complications and turn them into opportunities. The way you fight for what matters. He gestured around them. The way you somehow found a cottage that feels like our cabin, only safer, she finished. Better equipped for Emma's recovery, but still a home, not a showpiece. She hesitated, then added, I had them bring some things from your cabin. Emma's nature journals, your father's tools, the family photos. They're in boxes in the living room. I thought we could decide together where everything belongs. The thoughtfulness of it caught him off guard. She hadn't just offered them shelter. She'd understood the importance of maintaining connections to their past while building something new. A small sound from the bed drew their attention. Emma was watching them through half-opened eyes, a slight smile on her face. Is this our new home? She asked sleepily. Sarah looked at Mark, letting him take the lead. He moved to sit on the edge of the bed, brushing Emma's hair back from her forehead. What do you think, sunshine? Think we could be happy here? Emma's gaze traveled around the room, taking in the large windows, the space already set up for her science projects, the cozy reading nook Sarah had created in one corner. It feels like our cabin, she said finally, but bigger, and Sarah's. Here. I'll always be here, Sarah promised, sitting on Emma's other side. All those meetings, all those business trips. I'm delegating most of them. Some things are more important. Like hot chocolate? Emma asked hopefully, causing both adults to laugh. Like family, Sarah corrected gently. Like watching you grow up and become an amazing scientist. Like building a life with your dad. Mark reached across the bed to take her hand, remembering how they'd sat just like this in the hospital, linked by their love for the child between them. Together, he said softly. Emma's eyes were drifting closed again, but she smiled. Good, she murmured, because I already added Sarah to my family tree project for school. Sarah's hand trembled slightly in Mark's grasp. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the grounds in shades of gold, while somewhere in the distance, birds called to each other across the estate's gardens. In this quiet moment, their separate worlds didn't seem so different after all, just pieces of a larger whole. Finally falling into place, the family portrait sat in pride of place on the cottage's mantel, taken 6 months after Emma's recovery. It captured them in a candid moment. Emma, in her Milton Falls Academy uniform, proudly holding the ribbon from her first-place win at the state science fair. Mark in clean work clothes, his father's tools visible in the workshop behind them where he now restored antique furniture as a hobby. And Sarah, dressed casually but elegantly, her CEO persona softened by genuine happiness as she helped Emma display her award. The photograph told the story of how they'd found their balance. Sarah had restructured Maxwell Industries to allow for remote work, converting part of the cottage into a state-of-the-art home office where she could handle essential business while remaining present for family life. Mark had discovered that his craftsman's skills were in high demand among the estate's wealthy neighbors, leading to a thriving restoration business that preserved his independence while allowing him to work from home. But it was Emma who had truly blossomed. Her original research on forest decomposition had earned her a special mentorship with the Academy's Environmental Science Department. The greenhouse Sarah had promised now served as both laboratory and classroom, where Emma led workshops for other students interested in ecological studies. The media circus had eventually moved on to fresher stories, though occasionally magazines still ran features about the billionaire CEO's modern family. Sarah handled these with grace, using each opportunity to promote educational initiatives and environmental causes close to Emma's heart. The board had come to appreciate how her unconventional choices had actually enhanced the company's image, making Maxwell Industries a leader in corporate responsibility and educational advocacy. Their morning routine remained sacred. Each day began with Emma's perfected hot chocolate recipe, served in a mix of expensive china and beloved old mugs. Sarah had learned to braid her own hair, joining in as she and Emma experimented with new styles. Mark still fixed things around the house, though now he had a fully equipped workshop and could afford any tools he needed. Some days he deliberately used his father's old wrench anyway, remembering the lessons about value and honest work that had shaped him. The cabin still stood, maintained but uninhabited, a quiet reminder of where they'd started. They visited sometimes, Emma collecting samples for her research, Mark checking the repairs, Sarah understanding now why this simple space had felt more like a home than her penthouse ever had. They'd kept it as a touchstone, a place to remember. That true wealth couldn't be measured in square footage or stock prices. In the end, they'd written their own fairy tale, one where rescue went both ways. Sarah had saved them from financial struggles and limited opportunities, yes. But Mark and Emma had saved her too, showing her what it meant to be truly herself, to build a life based on love rather than expectations. Together, they'd created something none of them had quite believed in before, a future that honored both where they'd come from and who they were becoming. Emma had put it best, in her usual straightforward way. Some people thought it was weird, a billionaire and a handyman falling in love. But they didn't understand. Love isn't about what you own or what you do. It's about who you are when you're together. And together, we're just us. We're just family. The wedding ring caught the morning light as Sarah helped Emma adjust her graduation cap, the simple gold band, a testament to the life they'd built together. 2 years had passed since their quiet ceremony in the cottage garden, where Emma had served as both bridesmaid and best scientist, presenting her parents with data on how love literally changed brain chemistry. Now, watching her daughter prepare to deliver her valedictorian speech at Milton Falls Academy, Mark stood in the doorway, remembering a different morning, a different cry for help, a simple act of kindness that had changed everything. Sarah caught his eye in the mirror, her smile saying she was thinking the same thing. "Ready?" she asked them both. Emma grinned, straightening her honor cords. "Together? Always," Mark and Sarah answered in unison, stepping forward to embrace. Their daughter, their family, complete in every way that mattered.